In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So, recently, I don't suffer from allergies, but my wife Sarah does. And we recently went to see an allergist. And you know when you're about to go to see a physician, okay, they go through what they call a history and physical. Okay, and this, depending on whatever specialty, sometimes they get into a lot of detail, sometimes not too much detail, whatever. But the allergist said, well, before you come to this office, please make sure you fill out this paperwork, and they email it to you and so on. And we got this paperwork, and it was like 6 pages of the most annoying questions I've ever seen in my life. It was just like, and I started to fill it out for Sarah because she was running late, and then after a while, like I couldn't fill any more out, but it was just like, what kind of carpet do you have at home? What kind of pets do you have? What pets do you have when you're young? What pets do you have now? Have you ever noticed any allergies? What seasons do you get your allergies? Do you notice anything with food? It was like 6 pages of these like annoying questions. What percentage of your house is carpet versus wood? When did you buy your house? What kind of paint did you use on the walls in your house? What kind of pillow do you have? It's the most like painstaking history I've ever seen. And quite honestly, I found it to be annoying. But there was a purpose behind it. There's a purpose. She has a problem with allergies. And there's a million different things that anybody can be allergic to. But he has to go through all this in order to figure out what it was. Okay? He had to go through the whole history of every little detail, nook and cranny of our house and her history and everything in order to figure out eventually what was the problem. Okay? But I want you to hold that thought in your mind. Okay? Hold that thought in your mind. Now, one of the readings of today came from Colossians chapter 3. Okay? And those are here, I ask them to pay attention because God says a lot of things in Colossians chapter 3. St. Paul writes a lot of things for us. And I'm going to highlight some verses. Okay? In Colossians chapter 3, God lays out for us a life that like we should aspire to. A life that we as Christians, when we step into that relationship with God, like we feel like, this is going to be great. Okay? Let me point at verse, I believe it's 11. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing one another, and love and forgiving one another. It's a beautiful picture of what life as a Christian is like. I walk around, I have love, I have mercy, I forgive everybody. People like bear with me, I bear with them. It's a beautiful picture of what life should be. It's a beautiful picture of fellowship, of love. But man, I think it's really hard to attain. And I think a lot of people, we spend our lives like trying to attain this and we chase after it. And the part of that process of chasing after it, St. Paul tells us, well, what do we got to shed in order to get to this? And so if you look, I'm going to read some selections from this passage. It was Colossians 3, 1 through 17. I pick it up, verse 1. If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on the things of this earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ. Your life is hidden with Christ in God. If we skip a little bit, therefore, put to death your members which are on earth. Fornication, uncleanliness, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. And a little bit further down, but now you yourselves are to put off all these. Anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Man, if I could do all these things, that'd be great. But let's be honest, that's not easy. And honestly, when we attain for what God describes, trying to put off all those members, all those like behaviors, those tendencies, it gets frustrating along the way. It gets frustrating along the way. And a lot of times, we start to ask the question, is what he's describing worth the trouble of trying to shed all these things? Is it worth the trouble? Or Should I just know in my mind, it's what it should be, but this is reality. It's what it should be, but I can't get there. So I'll just live in reality. I'll build in just a way of life that, I just get angry at times. Certain situations where my mouth explodes. Get into a fight with my spouse, and I can't control myself. Somebody talks about this subject, well, it just makes me angry. And when I get angry, I struggle and I fall into other sins. God, I know this is the life, like you're describing something with you, but the reality is, I don't know how to get there. So I just learn, I compensate. And I go in and out every day of life, and I just learn that this is ideal, but this is reality. And I accept it. But that's not the way it should be. It's not the way it should be, and it's not what God intended. All right? And one of the answers came in the gospel of today, of how we begin to reconcile this. I had to, shed all these things, okay, in order to get what this life of love, joy, and peace, and the fruits of the Spirit, this life that God is describing to me. Well, how do I get there? One of the answers comes in the gospel of today. So the gospel of today comes from John chapter 4. John chapter 4, which is one of the readings during the Lent. Okay, it's one of the weeks of Lent, which is the story of the Samaritan woman. And Jesus was leaving, he had to go to Galilee, but in order to go to Galilee, he wanted to stop through Samaria, which was a little bit out of the way. So he stops, and it was in the heat of the day, and his disciples went to go get food because it was a pit stop for them. Okay? Disciples went to go get food, and Jesus sitting there at the well. Now, in those days, what would happen is that people, because the heat was unbelievable. If you've ever been to the Middle East in the middle of July, you know what unbelievable heat is. Or if you've been to like Arizona or one of these desert states, it's unbelievable. It's so hot but they need water to survive. So what would normally happen is in the morning, you would find a caravan of people going to get water from the well, and then they would go because it was still cool during the morning, and they would have their water for the rest of the day. And the next morning, they would do the same. Okay, except this one woman, the Samaritan woman. She comes, heat of noon. Hottest part of the day, coming to go get water. It's abnormal. It's abnormal. Okay? But she's hiding. She's hiding from her life. She doesn't want anybody to notice who she is. She's hiding. Alright? And she goes and she meets Jesus, and they start to have this conversation. Alright? Jesus says, give me something to drink. And first thing that she notices is, well, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, we don't get along. Okay? She's very astute. She notices we're different. Okay? Jesus says, wait a second. You don't really understand, what I'm trying to do here. If you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. And she says, but you got no bucket. So why would I ask you for a drink? It doesn't make sense. Alright? So they go back and forth. But the part I want to focus on is verse 13. So after they go back and forth, verse 13, Jesus answered and said to her, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. Okay? But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. If we jump back to the description of what our life, a great life with God should be, love, joy, peace, forgiveness, bearing with one another, long-suffering. Man, if I had that life, I wouldn't have any problems. It sounds great. We want that, but we don't know how to get there. Alright? And then she responds in verse 15. Then the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. She was so fed up with her life. She was so tired of having to walk in the heat of day to go get water, which was life-sustaining in those days. You didn't have water, you died. You lived in the desert, you died. And she was living alone. Not alone, but like she didn't have a community. So she needed to go get this water. Then Jesus presents a door for her. He sees what she wants, but now he presents a door. Okay, and his door came in the form of this. Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." That was the door. This is the key door, which begins to open up to the next part of her life. He says, "Go call your husband." And she answers, "I don't have a husband." That's all she said. To our knowledge, that's all she said. I'm sure the conversation was most likely probably much longer than the description that we have here, but it's a summary. She said, "I don't have a husband." And Jesus said to her, "You have well said, I have no husband, for you've had 5 husbands, and the one who you have now is not your husband, and that you spoke truly." She talked about her present situation. She talked about the present. What did Jesus look at the present and get to? Jesus took the present situation, but he didn't stop at the present. He took the present situation and went where with it? Huh?
The past.
The past. Jesus went to the past. Jesus knew that the present situation of the man that you're living with who is not your husband is not the actual problem. The problem was everything that happened leading up to this situation. But he took the reality of the present situation and said the reality of the present is a doorway to the past. When we look at our lives at the present situation and the condition of our lives, it speaks to the past. And it's really hard to go forward until you look back. Jesus pointed at her saying, "Look, your situation is bad now, and yes, there's something greater in the future. But the only way to get to the future is to look at the reality of the past. And the past is, you've had 5 husbands." Then they continue this conversation, and eventually she runs back to the town, and what does she tell everybody? "Come see a man who told me everything that I've ever done." Told me everything that I've ever done. Jesus wanted her to go forward. Jesus wants you and me to go forward. Jesus wants us to attain the life that he describes. Okay? But today he tells us that the key to being able to go forward is to take time, look at the reality of the situation now, and see it as a doorway to the past. And when we begin to unlock the past, when we begin to figure out the past, it makes a lot more sense going forward. Because you aren't just, when people say, "Well, that's just me," no, you aren't just you. You are everything in your past. And if you want to understand why you do the things you do, you look back. Okay, one of the ways, how do we look back? You got to look into the family tree and figure out things. Look at your family structure. Look at relationships in your family. What's your relationship with your sibling? What's your relationship with your parents? What things did they do that were good? What things did they do that were not good? How did they frustrate you? How did they anger? What were some of the traumatic events of your life growing up? Did you move a lot? Did you immigrate? What are the different things? Because all those things build into who you become as a person. Came across a really great saying this last week. Somebody said, "Jesus may be in your heart, but Grandpa's in your bones." Jesus is in your heart, but Grandpa is in your bones. Because we come from generations. We're a product of generations. And so Jesus is there and he wants to do great things, but we got to figure out the structure in which Jesus is working in our lives. And the structure comes from our family background. He did it for the Samaritan woman. He wants to do it with you, but he wants you to start to take those steps. He wants you and me to take those steps. I've started this journey myself, and I've uncovered earth-shattering realities about myself as an individual. that I could not figure out certain tendencies, behaviors, struggles about myself. But when I started to look back and figure out things and even put it on paper, it opened up a completely different world as to, and has now enabled me to deal with myself appropriately. And now I'm taking steps in a better direction. Jesus was in my heart. Always has been. Man, my family's been in my bones for a long time. But Jesus calls me to something different. Not to deny my parents and my family. But Jesus calls me to a different life. And that supersedes what we've learned from family and different things. What Jesus calls us to supersedes what we have learned from our families. But the only way to break through is to first look at it. Painful. For some of us, it will be painful. But the key to the future. Will you take that journey?